Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to a new episode of Business Insider. Tonight, we'll be talking about food security and climate change, a very important topic that was discussed in detail in the latest edition of COP28 that were held by the United Arab Emirates, of course, after COP27 was held here in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in November of last year. We'll be doing that in the company of Dr. Abdel Badr, the professor of plant genetics and biodiversity at Hulwan University, a man who was there at COP28 in the UAE. A very good evening to you, Dr. Badr. Always a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me in your
Thank
show.
you,
Thank
Dr. Badr, for being with us. Allow us, please, and allow us, dear viewers, first to watch a report about our main topic for tonight, and then come back and start our discussion.
Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli held a meeting with a delegation from Italy where they discussed strategies to enhance cooperation in the field of food security. The meeting commenced with Prime Minister Madbouli underscoring the strong bilateral ties binding the two nations both at the political and economic levels. He emphasized the shared commitment of both nations to collaborate in the fields of land reclamation, crop cultivation and agricultural industrialization. During the meeting, Madbouli expressed his Italy's advanced technologies, recognizing their potential to bring substantial value to land reclamation projects in Egypt. He further highlighted Egypt's ongoing efforts in opening up extensive areas of reclaimed lands where played a pivotal role in achieving food security. The Prime Minister outlined the ambitious goal of adding nearly 3 million agricultural acres to Egypt's agricultural landscape within the next few years. The Agriculture Export Council recently reported a remarkable growth of 24.6% in agricultural exports during the 2022-2023 season, with the value increasing from $2.860 billion to $3.566 billion. Additionally, the latest data from the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, CAPMAS, revealed a substantial increase in trade volume between Egypt and Italy. In 2021, the trade volume surged by 29%, reaching $5.8 billion compared to the previous year's $4.5 billion. This upward trend demonstrates the strengthening economic ties between the two nations. The Italian investments in Egypt have also witnessed a significant boost. In the first quarter of fiscal year 2021-2022, Italian investments increased by 40.3%, reaching $448.8 million. Earlier in March, Minister of International Cooperation Rani al-Mashat participated in the opening session of the Cairo Food Summit under the title Investing in Achieving Efficiency and Sustainability of Agriculture, which is held under the auspices of the Ministerial of International Cooperation, Trade and Industry, Agriculture and Land Reclamation, Finance and Internal Trade. In her speech, Al-Mashat stressed the significance of food security as a top priority for the government, especially at this time, explaining that the country began in 2014 to significantly expand food security efforts, build silos, and expand the agriculture area. Minister Al-Mashat noted that the Ministry of International Cooperation is working to move quickly with multilateral and bilateral development partners to meet the country's national priorities and achieve integration between national efforts and efforts of the international partners to provide all aspects of support in food security. During the past year, the ministry coordinated with many development partners, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank, to provide emergency soft funds to support food security in light of the repercussions of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis.
Thank you very much, Abir Hussein and Rasha Abdel Hamid, for this report back here in the studio with Dr. Abdel Badr, who attended COP28, the 2023 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC or UNFCCC, that's Climate Change Conference, commonly known, of course, as COP. It was held in the UAE. That's 1 year after Egypt held it here in Sharm el-Sheikh, of course. And Azerbaijan is to host COP29 in November of 2024. Now, Dr. Badr,
yes.
Tell us about the main discussions that you were part of at COP28 that tackled food security and climate change.
Yes, food security and the climate change was the last part of the conference, because the participation of the Egyptian delegates started from day one with the political negotiations and political delegation, and then there was some other delegations for health, other delegation for water, and the last part of the conference, the last 3 days were concerned with agriculture and environment, and that was the topic I took part in, from the 9th to the 12th of December. And I was a panelist for a round-the-table discussion on climate change and food security. And the panelists were four. One was talking about the genetic resources that would be resources for the future production of crops that can be resilient to climate change. And the second panelist addressed the economic impacts of food with the climate change. It's expected that the food price will rise, and how much will food prices rise due to climate change, and how can we handle our food security with this shortage of food supply and the supply chain as well. And the third was the quality of food. A food scientist was talking about how can we improve the quality of food, and how can we, one of the topics actually was addressed is to increase the plant part of the food at the cost of the animal part of the food, because in nature, or in fact in the ecosystem, the biomass of plants is much bigger than the animal biomass. For example, if you grow the field to get wheat or to get maize, you will get a lot of wheat or maize or potato and so on. But if you graze the plants to get meat, you will get about 10% of the mass as meat. So the idea is to increase using plant-originated food rather than animal-originated food. That's one idea of this. Of course, we cannot avoid using animal protein, because animal protein has some amino acids that's not present in the plant protein.
Right.
And the fourth panelist was talking about some neglected crops, some wild plants that may be adopted as future crops at the time of climate change.
Right. Dr. Badr, I want to take all of the four branches of the discussion there at COP28 with you in detail, but specifically the one, the one concerned, of course, with the genetic resources and food security under climate change. But just give us first a briefing about each of the other three topics, and what did you reach there from your panels, discussions, seminars, any resolutions, any recommendations?
The recommendation, for example, one of the participants was the ambassador representing the foreign ministry, and actually has an intervention, a very interesting intervention. We should actually talk not only about science, but other impacts of climate change on social science, on political science, on migration, and so on. And of course, that's another
a very important aspect.
But it's very important aspects. It could have been dealt with in other panel discussions, because Egypt has organized many panel discussions.
Egypt is a leader when it comes to climate change, and under the auspices of His Excellency President Sisi, Egypt has been a leader in this in this domain, and the political will is obviously there to continue to play this leadership role globally when it comes to fighting global warming.
One of the other aspects is to the migration due to climate change. If there is some hunger or famine somewhere, then we have a refugee who wanted to leave their lands to try to find the food somewhere else. That's another problem which was not addressed in our panel.
That's a problem happening now next to us in Gaza due to the barbaric Israeli aggression against Palestinian civilians, mainly women and children, and really bringing the land to waste. I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, how will Gaza suffer? I'm not here talking about the inhumane suffering by the brutal, internationally illegal aggression by the Israeli occupation in killing the Palestinian women and children and civilians, but I'm also talking about the nature of Gaza's lands, the future agriculture there, the water there. How will it be affected by the Israeli bombs, the white phosphorus bombs, and so on?
I think the situation in Gaza is very severely damaging the future of the Palestinians, because their homes are destroyed, their lands are destroyed, they have no food, the food security to them is almost nil. Even they control the food being sent to the people of Gaza, and these are evil acts by the Israeli army, fighting the civilians, the children and women, and depriving them from water and from electricity and from food and probably
and from medicine as well.
and medicine as well. So they probably think that they may, being deprived from all ways of life, they may leave or migrate to somewhere else. So they talk about transfer to Egypt or to Jordan, but we must actually be proud of the Palestinians who, in spite of the suffering and in spite of the depriving them from all means of life, they still live in Gaza, and they still wanted to live in Gaza. They would not come to Egypt or go anywhere, because this is their land, and they will never give it to the Israelis.
And of course, and we salute the bravery of the Palestinian people, the sacrifices of the Palestinian people, the steadfastness of the Palestinian people. And we must also mention that Egypt and Jordan have both said that this is a red line, this is unacceptable.
Yes. Back to the topics of the panel.
Yes.
Dr. Mahmoud Touni, from the professor of economy, talked about the potential impact of food price rising on food security, and he estimated that the food rise may be extreme to up to 60%, probably because to Egypt, Egypt is imports almost half of its food, and probably it's well known that food supply chain may
especially
be
the
complicated,
wheat imports,
wheat and oil crops, and 60% increase in price would be too difficult to handle unless we actually produce food by ourselves. And for this reason, we reclaim new lands, and we probably produce new crops that can be grown in the marginal land, marginal crops for marginal land, marginal crops that can stand climate change, salinity or drought or heat, and by time the fertility of the soil will be improved, and then we can introduce normal crops with high productivity to this new land. But this is an option which I think the Minister of Agriculture and is taken care of, and probably this new land being reclaimed in different parts of Egypt is increasing the area, the agriculture area of the country. That's one option to increase our homemade food, not to depend largely on imported food.
Achieve self-sufficiency.
Because imported food will be more expensive than
that's the economic impact.
Yes.
Yes.
The other thing is to try to improve the food quality, and as I said, to try to use more vegetables and more plant biomasses at the expense of animal biomasses.
Yes.
That's another option, because with the plant food we can probably have enough food for the people to eat. And anyway, red meat is not always good for the health. It's okay. And the other part of the other panelist was talking about introducing some marginal crops. He actually took example of millilotus, and which is a plant similar to maize, and they have small grains at the top of the plant. It's grown in Africa, and it was neglected, but now, because it has a potential to withstand the salinity and the drought, it's a promising crop, because in the future we can actually rely on these crops that's already adapted to climate change.
Very good.
Also, we can have these crops as resources for genes that can be transferred to normal crops and increase their ability to withstand harsh conditions or abiotic stress. Abiotic stress means stress induced by or imposed by environment, by climate, by soil, by salinity, not by pathogens or parasites.
Excellent. So, will this be a costly operation? I mean, a costly plan? I mean, will it cost us a lot to do that?
No, it would not. In the beginning, of course, you have to invest some infrastructure, but in the future, in the longer term, it would be fruitful to the economy.
Okay. Now to your a part of the discussion and your share in COP28, your specialty, the genetics, and we want just to remind our viewers and also for those who don't know, first of all, in a nutshell, in a simpler way, what are plant genetics?
Plant genetic resources or plant genetics?
Yes, resource.
Plant genetic resources are the plants that are not yet developed into commercial cultivars, like wild relatives of the crops. Wild relatives, each crop is related to a family or to a genus and these close relatives of the crop have similar genes to the crop, but it's not adapted for cultivation yet. These can be land races, can be obsolete varieties, and these are kept in gene banks. And when they are kept in gene banks, they are propagated every year, and they preserved either as seeds, normally as seeds, but every year must be grown and the new seeds are cultivated. And then you can also keep them as vegetative growth, as a tissue culture, or can keep them as genes. So in the gene bank, and every country now has a gene bank, the idea of gene banks actually was discovered more than 100 years ago, because Vavilov, the famous Russian scientist, said that the wild relatives of the crop is the origin of this crop. For example, wheat and barley has their origin in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, and the rice has its wild relatives in East Asia, and maize and cotton have their origins in America, and Middle and South America. So he said that the origin of these plants are its genetic resources. So people keep these, collect these, preserve these, manage these genetic resources, and there is agreements that regulate the exchange of genetic resources between different countries, and this is also regulated by the COP, the biodiversity convention. There is a convention on biodiversity. No country is allowed to take genetic resources from another country without the consent and approval of the country, and there is a fair share of benefits between the two. And these genetic resources, as I said, kept in gene banks, and every year they are propagated and managed for the future. And these are the start point for developing new crops that would be resilient to climate change, because they are more able to stand for the harsh conditions expected by climate change, particularly heat, salinity, and drought.
Right. Dr. Badr, so the genetic resources lead, the good management of the genetic resources would lead to crop diversification.
Yes.
So can you explain to us some processes by which we can do that?
Diversification is very important in genetics, because diversification opens up the way to gain more characters, more profits from the crops. There is inbreeding and inbreeding of living organisms actually lead to limited diversity. And the limited diversity is not good for the future of the crop. So the genetic diversity is important because it opens up, it offers more traits for the future crops to be discovered and to be introduced to new crop plants.
Right. There's something called domestication.
Yes.
On cereal crops. Can you tell us about?
Domestication started about 10,000 years ago when the people started to live in settlements. It's assumed that domestication started in 8 centers around in the world. One of the most important was the Fertile Crescent and the Mediterranean and the Middle Asia, Southeast Asia, and America, of course. And some people think of East Africa as a second domestication center. So these were civilization started. Civilization started by domestication. When humans started to live in settlements and societies, they started to domesticate crops and animals. So instead of grazing and running around to find the food or to hunt for animals, they started cultivation of crops and breeding animals and domesticating animals like buffaloes, like cows, and rabbits anyway. So the domestication is not only for plants but also for animals. With domestication, the people started to living in societies and in countries.
Are we still in the process of domesticating?
Yes, now it's artificial selection. The people in the past relied on natural selection. Natural selection is very famous because Darwin said evolution takes place by natural selection. But in agriculture, actually, we practice artificial selection. We select the proper traits, the traits that most beneficial to the crop, and we breed the plants with the best traits, with the best characters, or with the best food. There is something called domestication bottleneck. Domestication bottleneck.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, bottleneck means when you select the desired character, like increasing the number of grains in the spike, or increasing the size of the food, or increasing the size of the plant, then you select some genes and ignore others. So the plant loses some genes, but other genes are more expressed in this plant. With time, you need the genetic resource, because the lost genes must be kept in gene bank. When you need the genes, you will find it in the genetic resource. So this bottleneck is very is important. If you look at the size of the grains, for example, the grains we eat now is much bigger than the grains we domesticated 10,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago because of the artificial selection. But again, we lost some genes. Now, these genes are not in the current crop, but they are in the genetic resources kept in the gene banks. So the gene banks are reservoirs for future agriculture under different conditions.
How is climate change or global warming, the warming of the earth, affecting these plants now, and how are plants responding to drought, for instance, to a rise in temperature, to a scarcity of water, and how are we dealing with that?
So far, there is no serious problems because climate change does not happen overnight. It takes time. But there's some plants who can grow in arid lands, and some plants cannot grow in arid lands. In the arid lands, plants are adapted by several means of adaptation. For example, by reducing water loss, by keeping water and not transpiration of water. Transpiration is actually a very important process for plants because it is a loss of water through in the form of vapor. But transpiration is important because it moves the water inside the plant body. So the plant body wouldn't get hit, wouldn't get hot. Without the transpiration, without the loss of water in the form of vapor, the plants can be heated and damaged. So transpiration is very important. In some conditions, when the water is not available, the plant can regulate or can limit the plant loss. So he can use the few water available for life. That's one way of adaptation of plants to hot conditions.
Okay.
Of course, in agriculture is different from the wildlife, but we actually use the study of plants in different environments, help us discover how can we help the plants to grow well under different conditions, and we can use the genes that make the plants grow in arid environments to help the plants in the future if the climate change have caused some heat or some drought or salinity.
Yeah, very important point there, because I was going to ask you, I mean, let's assume that the world doesn't succeed in reducing the rise of temperature globally to 1.5 degrees over the next whatever years, and let's assume that the world that has failed in many, many things, including morally, like we are seeing.
It failed to make a decision by United Nations to
stop aggression, to stop killing women and children. So let's assume the world fails. And in 20, 30 years, the temperature increases by 3 degrees Celsius, 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. Let's just make this assumption. Will there be some plants that will be extinct and other plants that will be able to survive? Will there be some crops that will be specific types of crops that will be extinct and other crops that can survive?
Yes.
And we'd like to know which we are.
That's a very interesting point because scientifically, a life on Earth change by time, and if sometimes some plants are extinct, new plants will rise, and these plants will be more adapted to the new climate. But for food, we may manage this process. We can not actually rely on the natural processes to work by its own, but we can interfere to help the plants with the standard adapt to the new conditions.
Beautiful.
And this can be done by...
So you're not worried about something like that?
No, there's some, you know...
Because listening to you, I mean, you're telling us, if I understood you correctly, there will be a solution.
There will be a solution, of course.
Even if temperature continues to rise.
The life on Earth today is different from life on Earth 10 million years ago or 100 or something.
Sure.
But now the genetics have developed and the cultural means have developed, and there would be some inventions, some new ways to improve the plant's ability to live under higher temperature. Of course, there will be lots
but all of this will cost money,
will
and
be
all of
cost
this
money.
will
Will
make
be-
food costlier.
Yeah,
maybe.
may cost lives of some people.
Yeah, sure.
And
On the way, yeah,
as
of course,
well on the
yeah.
way. But the hope is there that we can have the capability and the technology to develop more crops. Genetic engineering can help. Gene editing now is a new approach in genetic improvement of characters, and smart agriculture is another way to try to make plants capable of living and reproduction under harsh conditions by the minimum use of water if drought is imposed by climate change. And of course, the scientists will do their best to discover some ideas that would help a plant remain on Earth and grow well and produce food for the human beings.
Wonderful. And will this be kept just to those who have the advanced technology and have the knowledge, or will this be some sort of secret, or will this be passed to underdeveloped countries, and the whole world would benefit from?
Of course, there is underdeveloped countries does not have the capabilities by the developed countries. But in agriculture, there are some simple inventions that would be solve the problems. So the technology gap in agriculture is not as wide as
it is in weapons.
As in weapons, for example. And we have farmers who have experience for years, and who have agriculturalists who have been working in our environment.
Because I had, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because I had a very distinguished guest with me here. He was a space scientist,
yes.
And he was talking about space technology democratization,
yes.
and that that this is not really happening, but this is the goal.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you about democratization of of the world of genetics, of the world of genetic resources or agricultural science.
Of course, the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, is a United Nations made organization to handle the cooperation in agricultural part in food security as well. And there is some cooperation. Actually, they have centers in different countries, and and they have a center in Aleppo, Syria, for agriculture and dry land, and they have center in Ethiopia, and they have centers in Egypt as well. So
wonderful.
These are actually organized by cooperations organized through the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. But I still think we have the ability to develop some new crops, but on our
very happy
own.
to hear that, and also very happy to hear that the gap is not that big in the field of agriculture science.
Because agriculture depends on the environment, and our environment, we have experience, more experience with our environment, like, not like European. Particularly the Egyptian farmer who's been cultivating land for thousands of years.
Sure.
Yes.
So, can you talk to us about also the applications of molecular tools in genetic resources management, and how this is important?
I hope that would be not difficult for the viewers. But molecular means we now use the molecular approach in biology. In the past, we use the external features of the creations to develop, to describe biology, to study biology. And then we use the anatomy, the section of the parts, and then the cell and the tissues. Now we work at the molecular level, and molecular level actually is concerned with the DNA, which is the genetic material, and the RNA, which is the message of genes, how genes work, and the proteins. These are what they call genetic part of the cell, and with this now we deal with the genes at the molecular level. So we use approaches like for example, instead of waiting to see how the character will look like, we can examine the gene and expect the character itself. So molecular ways is faster than waiting for the character for the plants to grow and see what's what. So we see marker assisted. We use what we call molecular markers, and it's called marker assisted breeding. So
it's your main tool in scientific research.
In breeding,
yes.
It's a recent tool in breeding. And marker assisted breeding means you have a mark. When you see this mark in the lab, you expect the plant to give you this trait. So this is make breeding faster and make breeding easier and make save time and efforts to use the molecular approach in your research.
Yes, thank you for trying to make it as simple as you can.
Yes.
And thank you for reckoning that, you know, some of this could be indeed hard to understand for non-scientists.
I try to reduce it, to make it short. Otherwise, I could have given a lecture.
I'm sure. Finally, Dr. Badr, what about the new technologies that are being used to make crops more resilient to climate change? Because it is happening. You know, it is happening.
Yes. The new technology started in the 60s by the so-called tissue cultures, because tissue culture means planting the plants in the lab and introducing it to the field. This saves time. Particularly in fruit trees and so on. And this approach is working very well now. And so you have thousands of plants in the lab in a short time. And instead of breeding in the field, you breed in the lab using what they call tissue culture, cylinder tissue culture. Another thing of tissue culture is to try to produce some important compounds in plant cells, like drugs and like secondary metabolites, which can be used for pharmacy, producing drugs and so on. And again, this is breeding. It's not exactly producing food, but producing medicine. That's another way of using tissue culture. And the other way is genetic engineering. And genetic engineering also started about in the last few decades and had made great success. And now we talk about gene editing. Genetic engineering means you transfer one gene from one crop to another, or probably from bacteria to plants, or from animal to plants, and so on. That is genetic engineering. Some people have some...
That could be a topic for a future episode.
Yes, okay.
Because indeed, very interesting.
Next time, genetic engineering.
Please.
Yeah, okay.
It sounds very, very interesting.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Abdel Fattah Badr, the Professor of Plant Genetics and Biodiversity, Helwan University. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear viewers, for watching us. Next week, same time, God willing, is a new episode of Business Insider. This is Mohammed Abdel Rahim, and this is goodbye.